Hi, I'm Jean Nolte, editor at Fons & Porter.
And I'm Colleen Tauke, the sewing specialist for Fons & Porter. In this tutorial, we will show you how to create the garden chevrons quilt.
For the pattern for this quilt, go to shopfonsandporter.com/quiltingquickly. Okay, so we're going to get started. This quilt uses 2.5-inch pre-cut strips of 1930s reproduction fabrics, and then 7 different solids, and from those you cut 2.5-inch strips.
Yes.
So this is a paper pieced quilt.
It's a little bit more challenging, but well worth it because your piecing becomes very accurate.
You know, and it's not that hard once you get in the swing of it.
Nope.
It's just the first couple of blocks. So we're going to start out, we have a foundation which is numbered 1 through 12, and so we're going to start in numerical order.
Yes, we are.
We're going to put the center piece is going to be blue. So what I do is I put it on the back side of the paper and I hold it up to the light and just line it up so that the top edge is about 1/4 inch outside this line between number 1 and 2. And if you just hand me the pin cushion or a pin, that's great. I pin it so it doesn't move. And I'm going to flip it over. Take my number 2 piece, which I've chosen to be green. It can be any one of the solid. And just line it up with that line that goes between 1 and 2. I'm going to stick that pin back in there and hand it to you. Then you sew on the right hand or the right side. Sew right on that line.
One thing nice about paper piecing is you don't have to worry about your seam allowances. Just stay on the lines. Everything we learned about staying in the lines of coloring in kindergarten we're using today.
Now, I like to shorten my stitch length just a teeny bit for this. It helps rip the paper off at the end.
Right. We've shortened the stitch length by 1 step, so you can do that on your sewing machine at home. And we sew just to the intersection and not past it, so to slow down. On this machine, it has a tie off, so we'll hit that button so it stays right there at the intersection.
Now, if you didn't have that, you'd probably want to back up a couple of stitches.
Exactly. Okay.
Okay, so now we're going to...
We'll clean up as we go. It's kind of nice to keep things thread-free when you're working with paper piecing.
It's always a little extra time as you go.
Yeah.
Makes it neater
Neat
all
and
the way
tidy.
through. Okay, so I'm going to do 2 things now. I'm going to just clean up that seam allowance, even though it's pretty close to 1/4 inch. What I do is I take an index card or a little ruler or something and I put it right on that line. And then I'm going to, and I don't really need to on this one because the stitching is there. Then
Here's where the accuracy comes in. Because you're folding right on the line, you can flip and then trim for your seam allowances.
And
we do need a ruler. Here we go. Got one.
Here it is. Okay, so I'm going to take that out of there. And I'm going to line the 1/4 inch line up right there on the edge of the paper. Just trim that off. And we're going to get rid of that. Now, the next piece we're going to put on is number 3. And this is where I use my card again. I put it right on that line. And I use it to fold the paper. It just makes a nice fold. And then I'm going to do the same thing I just did, is take the ruler.
You want to flip the green fabric back over on the other side first.
You know what? You're right.
Just
Before I do that, you know what I would do? I would press that.
True. Along with cleaning up those threads, we should press as we go. It keeps things nice and flat.
It's a little tricky with this glove on, but I'm not going to take it off. Okay, so we're going to press that out and make sure
it covers space number 2. That's what you're trying to do.
And that's good. Covers all of that.
Your pieces will be cut a little bit larger. When you work on a paper piece, you're always thinking, it seems so large, but then when you flip it to cover the space, you'll be happy. It's a little bit extra
Wait, we
fabric
almost had tears there. Good catch. All right, so now I put the 1/4 inch line right along the edge of the paper, and I'm going to just trim this blue away. And that gives me a nice line on the back for my next piece, which is another green one.
You'll notice in this quilt, the very centers of each of the chevrons is navy blue. Then we've selected a solid color, in this case green, and each of the blocks is a little bit different so that they're
Pins again.
scrappy in effect.
All right, now so I'm going to pin that in place. So you can go ahead and sew between the 1 and 3 now.
The pin is to help keep everything in place because as you slide it under the machine, something inevitably will try to scoot away from you.
All
It's nice to come in here, drop the needle right at the very beginning of your line. I'm going to do a quick tie off. And then stitch again right on the lines. It's kind of a nice relaxing time because you don't have to worry about your 1/4 inch seams.
Now this time you sewed all the way out to the edge
I
because
went to
it's
the
in the
edge.
seam allowance in
Right.
the outside.
On the
so-
outside edge, we can do that. We're allowed. Okay. And we'll take the pin out and
All
flip.
right, now that should be pretty good, so I'm going to just press that. Go ahead and press that out because we already had a 1/4 inch seam there.
At times when I'm doing this, I tend to finger press as I go, so I don't have to get up and back and forth with the iron as many times.
We're lucky because we have the iron so close. And I do hold it up to the light and I look. There's plenty there, so I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to put on piece number 4 now.
Exactly. At first, it seems a little bit clumsy to go back and forth from right side to wrong side of paper. The first block, maybe your kindergarten block. Use it as your practice. Once you get in the rhythm of stitching, folding, trimming, it's a repeat over and over, and it gets a lot more easy.
Always good to make a test block when you're doing this. Okay, so that gives me a good 1/4 inch seam. I'm going to put my last green square right up against there.
And
We
pin
can
to hold
stick
it
a
in
little
place.
pin in there for you. Oh, I'm going to put it on the right side though, so you can see it. And you're going
Best always to put the pins on the side where you're working so that it doesn't end up under the sewing machine presser foot. Okay, again, we drop the needle right into the sweet spot of the intersection. Then we can tie off at the beginning.
If not, you might want to go back and forth
That's
a couple
true.
of stitches.
If your machine doesn't have a setting for that, you can do just a little tiny
little back
stitch right in one spot. So all those things about staying inside the lines, helpful when you're paper piecing. Now we've basically created a nice, clean navy blue triangle in the middle, or the very beginning of our block.
So we're going to flip that down,
See how nice and neat that turned out.
give it a quick press, just to hold it in place. And now we're going to put the side ones on, and we've got one that's already started. So you would do the same thing here. We're going to put on piece number 5. So I'm going to first fold it back,
Create your nice
cut
straight
those
line.
off so I got a nice 1/4 inch seam. Line up the strip, and we've got one put on. We're going to put the other side on now. So I'm ready to put on piece number 6.
Exactly.
So I'm going to take my card. Again, this isn't quite as long as the line, but it's long enough to get a good start.
Once you've started that crease line, it will extend out for you in a straight line.
So I just fold it.
You'll notice the trimming gets to be a little more intense as you work your way out. There's more pieces to trim off, but you don't want to leave those behind because it's thick, and your block
way
will
too
get
thick.
very heavy after a while.
So now I have a nice straight 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to look at this and see, okay,
Everything
I need
extends
the piece
where it
that
needs to be.
matches this.
Now remember, the bars that go on from this point out, there should be a matching set. So keep your fabric sorted by the color.
Okay, so that only goes to right there, so I just need to make sure I've
Center it
covered
from
that
left to
far.
right.
And I've got enough to cover out to the edge here. Line those up. And I'm going to carefully flip that over.
You'll probably want to take a double check before you put it in the sewing
I
machine.
do indeed.
Nobody wants to
There
have
you
to
go.
tear up.
So that looks nice. You're ready to sew on piece
Okay.
number 6.
Now, you do have a chance that if you happen to put one in place and it's not quite where you need it to be, you have about one tear out possibility before the paper becomes a little
Paper gets
damaged.
a little weak. You do want to be careful, but really, once you get going, it gets a lot easier and it just goes pretty smoothly.
The nice part is you can hit the intersections completely, and that way you have perfect points when you flip over.
The thing that I would say with paper piecing is just don't be so stingy with your fabric. Cut the pieces oversized, cut them plenty big, and just plan that you're going to have a little bit of waste. Let me just
Look
give
at
that a
how
quick
sweet
press.
those
Yes.
intersections come out.
Let me give that a quick press here.
Yep, then we'll be able to see it nice.
So there you go. Now you would just continue
In the same manner.
putting 7, 8 will match, 9 and 10 will match, and you keep going until you have one that looks like this. And you'll notice in this quilt, whatever color the triangles were in the middle, we put the same color
piece.
solid on the outside of the hexagon. So now, once you've made all of those hexagons, you're still not done. Now it's time to put them together.
At this point, he's not quite the right shape yet either.
Oh, that's
so
right.
we do have to trim him up.
So the
he
first
needs
thing
to look like a hexagon.
Yep. All right, so I'm going to use a ruler
Yep,
and
you
just
want
put
to
it on an outside edge,
Make sure it's the outside edge and not the stitching line.
not the stitching line. There's two
Why do
lines
I
on
say
this
that?
foundation.
Because in a class, I did that. I
So
trimmed
you
it.
must have learned the hard way.
I did. It was my kindergarten block. I got to start over. I was really good on the second time
Yep,
around.
there's just nothing you can do if you've cut your seam allowance off.
Yep.
So I'm going to cut all 6 sides right
All
on that
the-
line.
All the excess will become a sweet hexagon when we're done. Okay. One last.
And because these are foundations, all of your hexagons are going to be exactly the same size
Right.
and exactly the right size.
Exactly. So they fit so nicely together.
There's what it looks like, all ready to go. So now we're going to,
We have to join
Put
pieces
this
together to create a quilt
this other
top. So we've done a few pieces here. We've created a couple of rows for you so you can understand how this all gets put together.
so this one's going to go right in here.
Right. Make sure that your triangles are aligned in the right direction, that the V's are all going the same way, or you'll be taking something
Right.
out.
Okay, so do you like to sew the side or the top first?
And this one, I think what I'll do is I'll do a side seam because this underneath here is flat. I won't have to
You can fold that out of the way to
I
get
can
to
fold it back out of the way like this.
So we're gonna flip
Since
them
you know
over.
it's in the right position, flip it over. And guess what? You have a stitching line in paper that you can work on. So you take this right to the sewing machine.
You don't pin those? Or
I will
you
pin when
do
I get it
pin.
here.
Okay.
It's just I'm not going to reach quite that far. My arms aren't quite that long. Okay, so we align because we've cut on the paper.
They should be
everything's
perfectly aligned.
perfectly aligned. Fold this one back out of the way. You can drop a pin right at the intersection and peek underneath and see that that's
sure.
exactly in the right place. And at this point, we're sewing dot to dot.
Okay, so that means the corner intersection of the two stitching
Correct.
lines,
From here to here.
not out into the seam allowance.
It's a little bulky with the paper in there, but it's just one of those things you get used to the sound of it and maneuvering it, knowing that it's creating a really exact block for you. The payoff is good.
You know, when I make a quilt like this, I would make it in like quarters or sections, not long rows. I would
Yeah.
make it in more rectangular chunks and then put the chunks together later so it's not so hard to maneuver on the sewing machine.
You want to hit right at that intersection. You can do a little tiny back stitch or a tie off, depending on what your sewing machine works like. And then
You
take
can
it
take
out.
that out of there.
Okay, we've now got this one in place, nice and neat. We just
Yeah.
have to worry about this seam here. So
It looks like
right
it's gonna
sides
just-
together, kind of fold and maneuver. It's a little bit at first to get used to having to work with a bulkiness to one
Now, like,
side.
did that, yep, it just sort of tucked itself around there.
Then turn the seam, pull the seam allowance out. So we want sandwich these off to one side. Align that outer edge. Look at how sweet that matched up.
Perfect.
Put in a pin.
There we go.
Okay, back under the sewing machine again from where the lines intersect to shape the
So
hexagon.
not out into the seam allowance at all.
Right into that sweet spot. Drop the needle. Tie off. You want to tie off or back stitch a tiny, tiny bit here, just a couple of stitches, because that's a stress point in your quilt. And as you're maneuvering to fold things back out of the way, it will keep the seams from popping on you. You don't want that to happen.
And again,
Whoops. Don't do like I do. Do as I
stop
say.
stop at the intersection.
You're right.
But that won't.
Stop at
that
the
should-
intersection.
It just makes it easier to put the
Just
next one in.
slip out that last little stitch so you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
Sometimes we learn by mistakes, don't we?
And then we just press that, and they sort of tell you which way they want to go.
Look, all she did was push it on
I
it. and
pushed
the
on
seam
it and it
allowance
just flattened
told
right
you
out.
exactly where it wanted to go.
So now we have just a couple more things we need to do. We need to fill in these bases along the sides.
As you can see in the quilt, there's a turquoise down the sides. Not across the top, just down the sides.
So Colleen has marked these because we don't have the lines that we had on the paper. So she's marked those dots where the intersections of the sewing lines will be.
And those set in the same way we placed this block,
So you're just
from
going to
intersection to intersection.
flip it upside down here
And stitch.
Actually.
Oops, dots up. That's right. There we go.
Because it's a solid fabric, it looks the same on either side, but your dots would be on the wrong side of your fabric. So you're going to sew here from dot to dot, and then just flip it around and sew dot to dot there, and put these blue pieces
Pretend this is the width of the whole quilt.
in the whole quilt, right. On both sides, you'll fill in with blue pieces, and then when you're done, you'll notice this block at the top is cut off already. And this blue piece will have to be cut off to straighten the top. And the same thing will happen on the bottom. And you'll have your quilt top finished.
Garden chevrons completed. Thanks for joining us today.
To see more of our videos, go to video.fonsandporter.com.